John 3:36. Qui credit in filium habet vitam aeternam. Qui autem incredulus est filio non videbit vitam, sed ira Dei manet super eum. He who believes in the Son has life everlasting. But he who is unbelieving in the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains upon him. Credit in filium brings before our eyes one more time in this final verse of chapter 3 of the book of John the different constructions that we find sometimes with credere. Frequently we see it with the dative case, and that's going to be important in a moment in this very verse. Qui credit in filium, he who believes on the Son or in the Son, has now, notice, as a present possession, vitam aeternam, eternal or everlasting life. As often, the adjective follows the noun. That's sort of the typical pattern in Latin, though there are numerous exceptions. Here we've got to put a bit of a pause in the punctuation, which we can do like this, big fat semicolon there. But now we constantly are talking about autem. Does it simply mean and, or does it mean but? That is, does it have a true adversative sense? Here, I think you'll agree with me that it does have a true adversative sense, almost like said, since we've got a contrast here. He who incredulus est, he who is unbelieving, literally. So here we could simply say, for a synonym, non credit, he who doesn't believe, and that's going to help us make sense of filio. Remember, we just said that credere is frequently found with the dative case. That's what we've got right here. And that action of credere, in taking a dative like that, is coming out of incredulus, as though it were a verb and not an adjective. Incredulus, he who does not believe or is not believing in the Son. It est non credit filio, it est non credit in filium. What is true in his case? He shall not see, non videbit vitam, sed ira. And depending on context, we need to translate this differently. Most basically, anger. But when we're talking about Deus, capital D, or a Deus, small d, wrath is a more appropriate expression. You might think, for instance, if you have done some classical learning and classical reading, of the very first word of the Iliad. In Greek, menes, wrath. Not just the anger of a small and limited human being, but wrath, the great and supernatural anger of a deity. Ira, in Latin, actually can cover both cases. Ira can be the way you feel about your dog if he's not listening to your commands, and ira can represent the supernatural, everlasting anger or wrath of God, depending on context. So that just gives a nice illustration of kind of the flexibility and elasticity of Latin vocabulary. Sed ira Dei manet super eum. This is one of those idioms that comes from a Greek way of thinking rather than a traditional Latin one. Manet super eum ira. It remains upon him.